The dawn came slow and suffocating to the Amazon basin. There was no gentle sunrise here, no golden rays painting mountain peaks. Instead, the light filtered through a ceiling of green so dense it turned day into a murky, oppressive twilight. The air hung thick and wet, a living thing that clung to skin and filled lungs with a taste of rot and growth in equal measure. This was the green hell, and for the man who called it home, it was the closest thing to peace he had found in years. His name was Marcus, Captain Marcus Reed, formerly of SEAL Team 3, now simply a ghost who had chosen to disappear into the one place on Earth where ghosts could truly vanish. He was 46 years old, though the jungle had aged him in ways that transcended mere numbers. His frame was tall and lean, muscles stripped to functional sinew by months of survival living. His dark hair, once regulation short, now fell in an unruly mess past his collar, streaked with premature silver at the temples. A thick beard, more pragmatic than stylish, covered the lower half of his face, unable to hide the hard lines carved by sun, stress, and memories he could not outrun. His eyes were the darkest brown, almost black, and they held a constant state of alertness, a hypervigilance that never truly slept. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much and survived when he should not have. The most striking feature, however, was the scar. It ran from his right shoulder, up along his neck, disappearing into his hairline. A thick surgical line of puckered flesh. A souvenir from Fallujah, 2018, when an IED had torn his convoy apart and left him the sole survivor. The physical wound had healed. The others never would. His right hand bore another reminder, a persistent tremor that manifested in moments of stress or stillness, a neural ghost that no amount of discipline could completely suppress. This morning, he wore his standard uniform for the jungle, a faded olive-green tactical shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, over a gray, moisture-wicking undershirt. Cargo pants, once tan, now stained to a mottled brown-green by mud and vegetation. His boots were heavy-duty hiking models, worn but meticulously maintained. On his belt hung a fixed-blade knife, a Gerber strong-arm, and a worn leather holster containing his sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226 that had been with him since his SEAL days. He stood on the covered porch of his shelter, a structure barely worthy of being called a cabin. It was more a large lean-to, constructed from salvaged timber and corrugated metal sheets, elevated on stilts to keep it above the flood line and away from ground predators. It was functional, nothing more. A place to sleep, to store supplies, to exist. Not a home, just a waypoint in a life that had lost its destination. Marcus took a slow sip from a battered tin cup, the black coffee inside strong enough to strip paint. His gaze swept the clearing, a constant security check that was as automatic as breathing. The jungle pressed in from all sides, a wall of green punctuated by the massive trunks of kapok and Brazil nut trees. Vines as thick as his arm hung like the rigging of some ancient biological ship. The sound was overwhelming, a cacophony of screeches, howls, clicks and buzzes that never ceased, day or night. Howler monkeys roared in the canopy. Macaws shrieked their territorial disputes. Somewhere in the distance, a jaguar coughed, a sound that made even the other predators nervous. A low, rumbling growl broke through the ambient noise. Marcus looked down. Lying at his feet, perfectly still, except for the slow sweep of his tail, was Max. Max was a German shepherd, a sable variant, his coat a striking mix of charcoal grey, silver and cream. He was large, easily 90 pounds of pure working dog muscle, built for endurance and combat, not show. His lineage was impeccable, bred from generations of military working dogs. He was 4 years old, in his prime, and every inch of him radiated controlled power and unwavering focus. His eyes were a piercing amber, intelligent and assessing, currently fixed on his handler's face with an intensity that bordered on telepathic. Max was more than a dog. He was a brother-in-arms, a fellow operator who had served alongside Marcus in the Navy's MWD program. They had deployed together to Syria in 2021, where Max had proven his worth 100 times over, detecting IEDs, tracking insurgents, and on more than one occasion, saving Marcus's life with his keen senses and fearless aggression. When Marcus had been medically discharged in late 2023, broken in body and spirit, he had fought the bureaucracy for months to take Max with him. The dog was officially retired, deemed too old for further service by the same Pentagon bean counters who sent 18-year-olds into combat. Marcus had called in every favor, leaned on every contact, and finally, Max was his. The dog bore his own scars. A chunk was missing from the tip of his left ear, torn off by shrapnel in Aleppo. His right hind leg carried old injuries. A slight hitch in his gait, visible only when he was tired or the humidity was particularly brutal, which in the Amazon was always. But like Marcus, Max's true wounds were invisible. He was hyper-alert, slow to trust, and prone to aggressive responses to sudden movements or loud noises. They were two damaged souls, bound by trauma and mutual dependence, exiled to the edge of the world. Marcus reached down and ran his hand through the thick fur behind Max's ears. The dog's growl softened into a contented rumble, his tail thumping once against the wooden planks. "Easy, boy," Marcus murmured, his voice a low rasp, rough from disuse. "Just another morning in paradise." Max's ears swiveled, tracking a sound Marcus couldn't yet hear. The dog's body tensed slightly, a coiled spring ready to release. Marcus's hand instinctively moved to the knife on his belt, his own senses sharpening. But after a moment, Max relaxed. False alarm. Probably a coati foraging in the underbrush. They had been here for 8 months. 8 months, since Marcus had liquidated what little he had left in the States, bought a one-way ticket to Manaus, and then paid an exorbitant sum in cash to a river trader to ferry him and Max deep into the Javari Valley, one of the most remote and lawless regions of the Brazilian Amazon. He had chosen this place for its isolation, its hostility, its sheer indifference to human life. Here, the U.S. government's reach was negligible. Here, the ghosts of dead comrades and failed missions could not follow, or so he had hoped. The truth was more complicated. The jungle did not erase the past. It simply provided a different soundtrack to the nightmares. The screams of dying men were replaced by the shrieks of monkeys. The stench of cordite and burning flesh was replaced by the smell of decaying vegetation and stagnant water. But the weight remained. The guilt. The survivor's burden. Why him? Why was he still breathing when so many better men were rotting in graves at Arlington? Max sensed the shift in his mood. The dog stood, shook himself, and pressed his solid body against Marcus's leg, a grounding weight. It was a technique they had both learned, a way to anchor each other when the darkness crept in. Marcus looked down, meeting those amber eyes, and nodded. "Yeah, I know. Time to move." Their routine was simple. Survive, hunt, patrol, repeat. It was a life stripped to its barest essentials, and in that simplicity, Marcus found a measure of control he had lost in the chaos of war and its aftermath. Today's plan was a multi-day hunt into the deeper jungle, targeting peccary or tapir. The protein was necessary, but more than that, the hunt provided purpose, a mission objective that demanded focus and left little room for introspection. Inside the shelter, Marcus moved with practiced efficiency. He checked his primary weapon, an AR-15 platform rifle he had smuggled piece by piece into Brazil and reassembled here. It was not legal, not registered, and utterly necessary. He cleaned and oiled it with the care of a surgeon, every movement automatic. Next, he packed his rucksack. Water purification tablets, a compact medical kit, a hammock with mosquito netting, fire-starting materials, MREs scavenged from various sources, and a worn topographic map of the region, hand-annotated with landmarks and danger zones. Max watched from the doorway, his head tilted, ears forward. He knew the drill. When Marcus finally shouldered the pack and picked up his rifle, Max's tail began to wag, a rare display of excitement. A hunt meant action, meant purpose, meant doing what they were both trained to do. Marcus paused at the threshold, taking one last look at his Spartan shelter. He secured the door with a heavy padlock, more to deter curious animals than humans. Out here, there were no neighbors, no passers-by, just the jungle and whatever it chose to reveal. He gave a low whistle, 2 short notes. Max immediately moved to his left side, falling into a heel position that was ingrained muscle memory. Together, they stepped off the porch and into the green. The jungle swallowed them whole. The first day passed in a blur of heat, humidity, and the relentless struggle against terrain that actively resisted human passage. They moved through a world of vertical complexity, where the ground was a treacherous mix of mud, roots, and hidden sinkholes, and the air above was a cathedral of branches and vines that blocked out the sky. Marcus navigated by compass and instinct, following game trails that were invisible to untrained eyes. Max ranged ahead, his nose to the ground, reading the complex tapestry of scents that told the story of every creature that had passed this way. By late afternoon, they had covered nearly 15 kilometers, a brutal slog that left Marcus drenched in sweat and Max panting heavily, despite the dog's superior conditioning. They found a small clearing near a sluggish brown creek, the water stained by tannins but drinkable after filtration. Marcus set up a minimal camp, stringing his hammock between 2 trees and building a small, smokeless fire in a pit lined with stones. He heated water for coffee and rehydrated an MRE, chicken and rice, which he split evenly with Max. The dog devoured his portion in seconds, then lay down with his head on his paws, amber eyes reflecting the firelight. As darkness fell with tropical abruptness, the jungle's night shift began. The daytime cacophony was replaced by a different orchestra. The deep thrumming of bullfrogs, the high-pitched whine of mosquitoes, the occasional splash as a caiman slipped into the water. Marcus sat with his back against a tree, his rifle across his lap, and stared into the flames. The fire was a risk. It advertised their position to anyone or anything watching. But it also kept the predators at bay, both the 4-legged and the 2-legged kind. Out here, fire was life. Max suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Marcus's hand went to his rifle, his finger resting alongside the trigger guard, not on the trigger. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Max's growl intensified, his lips pulled back, revealing teeth that gleamed white in the firelight. Every muscle in his body was tensed, ready to explode into action. Marcus strained his ears, filtering out the background noise, listening for what Max had detected, and then he heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling their camp just beyond the edge of visibility. Not the padding of a jaguar or the shuffle of a tapir. Bipedal, human. His heart rate spiked, adrenaline flooding his system. His vision sharpened, his breathing slowed. Combat mode, automatic and terrifying in its familiarity. He rose slowly to his feet, bringing the rifle up to a low-ready position, scanning the darkness. "I know you're out there," he called out in Portuguese, his accent thick but understandable. "Show yourself, or move on. Your choice." The footsteps stopped. Silence, heavy and expectant. Max's growl became a continuous, vibrating threat. Marcus's finger moved to the trigger, applying the first stage of pressure. 3 more pounds and the rifle would fire. Then, a voice. Heavily accented Portuguese, the speaker clearly indigenous. "American, we mean no harm. We are just passing." A figure stepped into the firelight, hands raised and empty. He was an older man, maybe 60, short and wiry, his skin the deep bronze of someone who had spent a lifetime under the sun. He wore simple clothes, faded jeans, and a worn football jersey. His eyes were cautious, but not hostile. Behind him, 2 more figures emerged. Younger men, likely his sons, carrying bows and machetes. They looked at Marcus and Max with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Marcus did not lower his rifle. "Passing through to where?" The older man gestured vaguely upriver. "Our village. Hunting has been poor. We go further." Marcus studied them for a long moment, his operator's assessment weighing threat levels. They were hunters, not soldiers. Their weapons were for game, not combat. Slowly, he lowered his rifle, though he kept it ready. "Understood. Safe travels." The older man nodded, his gaze lingering on Max, who had not stopped growling. "Your dog, he is Militar?" "Was. We both were." A flicker of understanding passed through the old man's eyes. He said something in a language Marcus didn't recognize, probably Matses or Matis, one of the indigenous tongues of the valley. The two younger men nodded and melted back into the jungle. The old man lingered a moment longer. "The jungle keeps many secrets, American. Some should stay buried." Then he too was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Marcus stood there for a long time, his rifle still in hand, listening. Finally, when he was certain they were alone again, he exhaled slowly and lowered the weapon. He looked down at Max, who had finally stopped growling but remained tense and alert. Good boy. Good alert. He fed another branch into the fire and settled back against the tree, but sleep would not come easily. The old man's words echoed in his mind. Some secrets should stay buried. It was a sentiment Marcus understood all too well. He had come here to bury his own secrets, to let them rot in the humid darkness. But the jungle, he was learning, did not respect such wishes. Dawn broke with the same suffocating humidity as the day before. Marcus woke to find Max already standing guard at the edge of their small camp, his body a statue of vigilance, his gaze fixed on the wall of green that surrounded them. The dog had not slept much. Neither had Marcus. The encounter with the indigenous hunters had stirred something in him. A paranoia he thought he had left behind in the desert. Out here, in this lawless vastness, trust was a luxury neither of them could afford. He broke camp quickly, burying the fire pit and scattering the ashes, erasing any evidence of their presence. It was old habit, fieldcraft drilled into him through years of operating in hostile territory. Leave no trace. Be a ghost. He shouldered his pack, checked his rifle, and gave Max the signal to move out. They continued deeper into the jungle, following a barely visible game trail that snaked along the banks of the creek. The water was their lifeline, providing navigation and the promise of prey. Animals had to drink, and where animals gathered, hunters followed. Marcus moved with the deliberate, energy-conserving pace of a man who understood that in the jungle, speed killed. Haste led to twisted ankles, snake bites, and exhaustion. Slow and steady was the only way to survive. Max ranged ahead, his nose working constantly, processing the million scents that humans were blind to. He moved with a confidence that came from years of training and deployment, his body language readable to Marcus like a text. Ears forward, investigating. Tail up, confident. Head low, body tense, threat detected. They communicated in a language older than words, a bond forged in the crucible of combat. By mid-morning, they had covered another 8 kilometers. The jungle here was different, older. The trees were massive, their trunks so wide it would take 5 men to encircle them. The canopy above was so dense that the light filtering through was green and dim, giving the air an underwater quality. Fungi of impossible colors grew on every surface, electric blues and virulent oranges. The humidity was so thick it felt like breathing through a wet towel. Marcus paused at a small opening in the vegetation, a natural clearing created by a fallen giant. He unslung his pack and pulled out his water bottle, taking a long drink before pouring some into a collapsible bowl for Max. The dog lapped it up gratefully, his pink tongue flashing against his dark muzzle. While Max drank, Marcus scanned the clearing, his eyes catching on something that made him pause. Tracks. Fresh, pressed into the soft mud near the creek's edge. He moved closer, kneeling to examine them. Peccary, a whole sounder by the looks of it. Maybe 8 to 10 animals. The tracks were less than 2 hours old, the edges still crisp, not yet melted by the heat. His pulse quickened. This was what they had come for. He looked at Max, who was already staring at the tracks, his body language shifting into hunt mode. "You smell them, boy?" Max's response was immediate. His head dropped, his nose went to the ground, and he began working the scent trail with the focused intensity of a K9 on a mission. He moved in a zigzag pattern, confirming the direction, then looked back at Marcus, his amber eyes clear and purposeful. The message was unmistakable. "I've got it. Follow me." Marcus brought his rifle up to a ready carry position, his thumb resting on the safety. They moved into the shadows, predators on the hunt. The trail led them along the creek for another kilometer before veering inland, climbing up a gentle slope into drier terrain. The undergrowth here was thicker, a tangle of thorny bushes and wait-a-minute vines that grabbed at clothes and skin. Marcus moved with exaggerated care, placing each foot deliberately, avoiding dry branches that would snap and announce their presence. Max was a gray ghost ahead of him, moving through the vegetation with an ease that defied his size. The scent trail was strong now. Marcus could smell them himself, a musky, earthy odor that meant the sounder was close. He dropped to a crouch, signaling Max to do the same. The dog obeyed instantly, his body flattening to the ground, only his eyes and ears visible above the undergrowth. Through a gap in the foliage, Marcus spotted movement. There, not 30 meters ahead, was the sounder. 9 peccaries, ranging from juveniles to a massive alpha male that had to weigh over 100 pounds. They were rooting in the leaf litter, grunting and squealing to each other, completely unaware of the 2 predators watching them. The alpha was perfect, enough meat to last Marcus and Max a week if properly smoked and preserved. Marcus began the slow, agonizing process of getting into position for a shot. Every movement had to be glacial, imperceptible. He brought the rifle up, settling the stock into his shoulder, his cheek pressing against the familiar contour. He centered the crosshairs on the alpha's shoulder, the kill zone, and began to control his breathing. Slow inhale, slow exhale. His finger found the trigger, taking up the slack. And then Max did something completely unexpected. The dog, who had been perfectly still beside him, suddenly stood, not in alarm, but with purpose. He ignored the peccaries entirely, his head turning sharply to the left, his body orienting toward a section of jungle that was even denser, darker. A low whine escaped his throat, not of fear, but of intense interest, almost excitement. Marcus's concentration broke. "Max! No! Stay!" But Max was no longer listening. The dog took 3 deliberate steps away from the sounder, his nose lifted, testing the air. His tail dropped, his ears folded back slightly, a sign of deep focus. Another whine, more insistent this time. He looked back at Marcus, and in that look was something Marcus had learned to recognize over years of partnership. "This is important. Follow me. Now." The peccaries, alerted by the movement, snorted in alarm and bolted, crashing through the undergrowth in a panic. The hunt was blown. Marcus bit back a curse. A week's worth of food, gone in an instant. But Max had never failed him before. If the dog said there was something more important than food, then there was. "All right, boy. Show me." Max didn't need to be told twice. He turned and plunged into the dense undergrowth, moving with sudden urgency. Marcus had no choice but to follow, struggling to keep up with the dog's superior agility. Branches whipped at his face, vines snagged his pack, but he pushed through, trusting Max's instincts over his own confusion. They descended into a ravine, a steep-sided gash in the earth that Marcus's map had not indicated. The terrain here was treacherous, loose rocks and slick mud, making every step a calculated risk. Max navigated it with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat, while Marcus half slid, half climbed down, using roots and saplings as handholds. The air grew cooler, damper, and carried a strange metallic tang that didn't belong. At the bottom of the ravine, a small, stagnant stream oozed through moss-covered rocks. The light was almost non-existent here, filtered through multiple layers of canopy into a greenish twilight. Max stopped at the base of a particularly steep section of the ravine wall, where a landslide had torn away vegetation and exposed raw earth. He was pawing at something, whining continuously now, his excitement palpable. Marcus approached cautiously, his hand on his rifle, his senses screaming that something was wrong. The metallic smell was stronger here, and there was something else, something that didn't belong in the organic chaos of the jungle, something artificial. He pushed aside a curtain of hanging roots and vines, and his breath caught in his throat. Buried in the earth, half exposed by the landslide, was metal. Not a rock, not a tree root, but manufactured, machined metal. He grabbed a handful of vines and tore them away, revealing more of the object. It was curved, painted in a flat, dark green, now faded and streaked with rust. As he pulled away more vegetation, the shape began to emerge from the earth like a fossil. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. It was the tail boom of a helicopter. And not just any helicopter. Even covered in decades of rot and jungle growth, he recognized the distinctive shape. A UH-60 Black Hawk. American military. His mind raced. What the hell was a U.S. military helicopter doing buried in the middle of the Brazilian Amazon? This region was hundreds of miles from any authorized American military operation. The Black Hawk wasn't just crashed. It was hidden, deliberately buried by time and nature. Max was digging frantically now, his powerful legs throwing dirt and vegetation behind him. Marcus joined him, using his hands and his knife to scrape away earth and roots. The more they uncovered, the more wrong it became. The entire fuselage was here, collapsed on its side, the rotors long since torn away or buried deeper. The side door was jammed half open, revealing a dark cavity within. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. This was bad. This was very, very bad. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to turn around, to walk away, to pretend he had never seen this. But he couldn't. He was a soldier, and soldiers didn't leave mysteries unsolved. More importantly, soldiers didn't leave other soldiers behind. He pulled out his flashlight, a tactical model with a powerful LED beam, and aimed it into the dark cavity of the fuselage. The light cut through the gloom, illuminating the interior. And there, still strapped into the pilot's seat, was a skeleton. The remains were dressed in the tattered remnants of a flight suit, the fabric rotted away to reveal bone. Dog tags still hung around the vertebrae of the neck. On the helmet, barely visible under a layer of mold, was a name stenciled in faded white letters. L.T. Harris. D. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air of the ravine. This wasn't just a crash. This was a tomb. Someone had died here, alone, forgotten, their sacrifice unmarked and unremembered. The guilt he carried for his own lost team flared hot and painful in his chest. Another soldier. Another brother abandoned. He forced himself to focus, to push the emotion down, and think tactically. He scanned the rest of the cockpit. Most of the equipment was destroyed, corroded into unrecognizable lumps of rust. But there, tucked under the co-pilot's seat, was something that had survived. A case. Military grade, hard shell, waterproof. It was locked with a heavy-duty combination lock that had somehow resisted the jungle's relentless decay. Marcus's hands moved to pull it free, but it was wedged tight. He braced his foot against the seat frame and pulled with both hands. Metal groaned, protesting, and then suddenly gave way. He stumbled backward, the case clutched in his arms, and landed hard on the muddy ground. Max was immediately at his side, sniffing the case intensely, his tail rigid. The case was heavier than it looked. Marcus set it down and examined the lock. It was a 5-digit mechanical combination, the numbers worn smooth by time but still functional. There was no way to force it open without destroying whatever was inside. He needed the code. He turned his attention back to the cockpit, specifically to the remains of Lieutenant Harris. He climbed back into the fuselage, moving with reverence and care around the bones of a fellow soldier. He checked the pockets of the flight suit, the remains of a survival vest. Most of it had rotted away, but tucked into an inner pocket, sealed in a waterproof pouch, he found it, a small notebook. The pages were damp and fragile, but readable. He carefully opened it, his flashlight illuminating handwritten notes, mission logs, coordinates, and on the final page, a sequence of numbers. 74839. Marcus climbed back out of the wreckage and tried the combination on the case. The tumblers clicked smoothly, and the lock popped open with a satisfying snick. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in protective foam, were items that made his blood run cold. A satellite phone, military grade, its battery long dead, but the device itself intact. A stack of documents, each page sealed in plastic, and a portable hard drive, ruggedized and encrypted, with a label that read, Operation Nightfall, classified. Marcus's hands trembled as he picked up one of the documents. It was a flight manifest, dated July 15, 2003. It listed cargo, small arms, ammunition, communications equipment. But the destination was what stopped his heart. It wasn't any U.S. military base. It was a set of coordinates in the Amazon with a notation. Delivery to Asset Viper 3. No official record. Burn after confirmation. This wasn't a crash. This was a black operation. An illegal arms transfer, buried and forgotten when it went wrong. Max suddenly erupted into a frenzy of barking, his body oriented back up the ravine toward the way they had come. The sound was urgent, aggressive, a threat warning. Marcus's head snapped up. He strained his ears, filtering out Max's barking and the background noise of the jungle. And then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of rotor blades, distant but growing louder. A helicopter, coming fast, coming here. A wave of cold realization washed over him. The satellite phone, the hard drive. These weren't just evidence of a decades-old crime. They were beacons. Someone had been monitoring this site, waiting for anyone stupid enough to find it. And he had just triggered an alarm he couldn't see. Marcus didn't hesitate. He slammed the case shut, jammed the lock closed, and stuffed it into his rucksack. He grabbed Max by the collar. "Move! Now!" They scrambled up the side of the ravine, clawing their way up the muddy slope with desperate speed. Behind them, the sound of the helicopter grew louder, a mechanical roar that drowned out the jungle. Marcus risked a glance back and saw it through a gap in the canopy. A civilian model, unmarked, but flying with military precision. It was circling the ravine, searchlights stabbing down through the trees. They weren't searching. They were hunting. Marcus and Max reached the top of the ravine and ran. Not the careful, methodical movement of a hunt, but an all-out sprint. Branches tore at them. Roots tried to trip them, but they crashed through with the desperation of prey fleeing a predator. Behind them, the helicopter found a clearing and dropped fast ropes. Men were coming, armed men. Marcus's mind was a whirlwind of calculations. He was one man with a rifle and a dog, being hunted by what was clearly a professional team with air support. The odds were impossible. He needed distance, concealment, and most of all, a plan. The jungle that had been his sanctuary was now his battlefield, and the war he thought he had left behind had just found him. They ran for 3 hours, pushing their bodies to the breaking point. The helicopter lost them in the dense canopy, unable to track them through the solid green ceiling, but Marcus knew that was only a temporary reprieve. The men on the ground would be following, and they would be good. Whoever was behind this operation had resources, training, and a very strong motivation to keep their secret buried. By the time Marcus finally allowed them to stop, both he and Max were on the verge of collapse. They had crossed 2 rivers, waded through a fetid swamp, and climbed a steep ridge, all while carrying the added weight of the case and the terrible knowledge it contained. They found shelter in a small cave, little more than an overhang of rock, but it was defensible and out of sight. Marcus collapsed against the stone wall, his lungs burning, his legs trembling with exhaustion. Max lay at his feet, panting heavily, his tongue lolling, but his eyes were still alert, still watching. Even in exhaustion, the dog refused to let his guard down. Marcus pulled the case from his pack and stared at it. This was the source of their nightmare. Whatever was on that hard drive, whatever those documents revealed, it was worth killing for. And now he was the only one who knew it existed. He thought about his shelter. Now 8 hours of hard travel behind them. He couldn't go back. They would be watching it. He thought about trying to contact someone. But who? The U.S. government was clearly involved in whatever this was. Local authorities would either be incompetent or complicit. He was alone. Truly alone. Except he wasn't. He looked down at Max, who was watching him with those amber eyes, full of trust and loyalty. The dog had saved his life today, alerting him to the helicopter in time to escape. And Max would keep saving him, as long as there was breath in his body. Marcus made a decision. He couldn't run forever. He had to get this evidence to someone who could do something with it, someone outside the system, someone who couldn't be silenced. A journalist, an activist, anyone with the platform and the courage to expose this. But first, he had to survive long enough to get out of the jungle, and that meant becoming what he had been trying to escape. He had to become a soldier again, a hunter, a killer. The green hell had just become a battlefield, and this time, the enemy wasn't going to win. Night fell over the Amazon like a curtain of black velvet, absolute and suffocating. The jungle's soundscape shifted from the chaos of day to the eerie symphony of nocturnal predators. Somewhere in the distance, a jaguar coughed, a sound that made even Max's ears twitch with primal recognition. Closer, the high-pitched whine of mosquitoes formed a maddening cloud around their shelter. Marcus had smeared himself and Max with a thick paste of mud and crushed leaves, a crude but effective insect repellent that made them both look like creatures of the swamp. He sat with his back against the stone wall of the overhang, the hard case open on his lap. The documents were spread carefully on a piece of waterproof tarp, illuminated by the dim red glow of his flashlight. Red light preserved night vision, another automatic habit from his years downrange. Max lay across the entrance to the cave, a living alarm system, his body oriented toward the jungle, his breathing slow and controlled despite their earlier exertion. Marcus forced himself to read methodically, to absorb every detail despite the exhaustion that pulled at his consciousness like a riptide. The first document was the flight manifest he had seen earlier, but as he read deeper, the implications became more sinister. The helicopter hadn't crashed. It had been delivering weapons to a covert asset, something or someone codenamed Viper 3. But there was a second notation, handwritten in the margin. Asset compromised. All personnel expendable. Sanitized site. Lieutenant Harris hadn't died in an accident. He had been murdered, shot down or sabotaged to eliminate a witness to an illegal operation. The crash site had been deliberately left to rot, Harris's body abandoned, his death erased from official records. No one had come looking because no one was supposed to know he existed. The next document was a communications log, filled with encoded transmissions. Marcus didn't have the cipher key, but he didn't need it. The pattern was clear. Regular deliveries over a 6-month period in 2003, all to the same coordinates, all marked as off books. Small arms, ammunition, anti-personnel mines, grenades, enough firepower to arm a small militia. But who was receiving them? And why? The third document answered that question in horrifying detail. It was an intelligence assessment, marked Top Secret, dated June 2003. The subject? A paramilitary group operating in the tri-border region of Brazil, Colombia, and Peru. According to the assessment, the group was a proxy force, trained and equipped by the CIA to destabilize drug cartels and FARC guerrillas in the region. The operation was unauthorized by Congress, funded through black budget channels, and completely deniable. Marcus felt sick. He had served his country with honor, had bled for it, had watched good men die for it. And all the while, elements within that same government were running illegal wars, arming militias, and murdering their own people to keep it secret. He turned his attention to the hard drive. It was a military-grade solid-state device, built to withstand electromagnetic pulses, water damage, and physical trauma. The casing was stamped with a serial number and a warning. Unauthorized access prohibited, lethal force authorized. Marcus had no way to access it here. No laptop, no power source beyond the dying batteries in his flashlight. He would need equipment, electricity, and most importantly, time. All three were in critically short supply. He carefully resealed the documents in their plastic sleeves and packed everything back into the case, his movements deliberate despite the tremor in his right hand. The tremor was worse now, exacerbated by stress and fatigue. He clenched his fist, forcing the muscles to obey, and snapped the case shut. Max's head suddenly lifted, his ears swiveling forward like radar dishes. A low growl began in his chest, barely audible but unmistakable. Marcus's hand went to his rifle, his body tensing. He killed the red light, plunging them into absolute darkness. For 30 seconds, There was nothing but the ambient sounds of the jungle. Then Marcus heard it. The crack of a branch, deliberate and close. Too heavy to be an animal. Human. Moving slowly, trying to be quiet but betrayed by the unforgiving terrain. Marcus brought his rifle up, flipping down his night vision monocolor that he kept clipped to his vest. The world bloomed into grainy green clarity. Through the vegetation, he could make out a shape. A man, dressed in dark tactical gear, carrying what looked like an M4 carbine with an infrared laser designator. The laser was invisible to the naked eye but blazed like a searchlight through night vision. The man was sweeping his laser in a grid pattern, searching. Behind him, Marcus could make out at least 2 more figures moving in a tactical formation. Professional, military or paramilitary, exactly what he had feared. Max's growl intensified. Marcus placed a hand on the dog's flank, a silent command to hold. Not yet. They were outnumbered and outgunned. A firefight would be suicide. The nearest man was now less than 20 meters away, close enough that Marcus could hear him breathing, could see the thermal scope mounted on his rifle. If that scope passed over their position, the body heat signature would give them away instantly. Marcus made a split-second decision. He couldn't fight, but he could misdirect. He carefully reached into his pack and pulled out one of his empty MRE pouches, still warm from his body heat. He lobbed it silently into the jungle, 10 meters to their right. It landed with a soft rustle in the underbrush. The effect was immediate. All 3 men oriented on the sound, their lasers converging on the spot. The nearest man spoke into a throat mic, his voice a harsh whisper that carried in the still air. Contact, Grid 7-9er, moving to engage. They moved toward the distraction with professional precision, covering each other, advancing by bounds. As soon as their backs were turned, Marcus tapped Max twice on the shoulder. The dog understood instantly. They slipped out of the cave and moved in the opposite direction, low and fast, using every scrap of cover. Behind them, Marcus heard a sharp command, followed by the sound of boots crashing through vegetation. They had found the empty pouch. They knew it was a diversion. But by then, Marcus and Max were already ghosts in the night. They moved through the darkness for 3 hours, navigating by compass and the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi that grew on rotting logs. The jungle at night was a different creature entirely. Every shadow a potential threat. Every sound magnified and distorted. Twice, they froze as patrols passed within meters of their position, the beams of tactical flashlights stabbing through the foliage like probing fingers. The hunters were organized and thorough. They had divided into teams, creating a net that was slowly tightening. Marcus counted at least 8 operators, possibly more. They had communication, night vision, and worst of all, time. They could afford to be patient, to wait for their prey to make a mistake. Marcus couldn't afford any mistakes. By the time false dawn began to lighten the sky from black to deep purple, they had put significant distance between themselves and the search teams. But Marcus knew it was temporary. With daylight would come aerial assets, drones or helicopters, and then there would be nowhere to hide. They needed a plan, a destination, a way out of this nightmare. Marcus pulled out his map, spreading it on the damp ground, and studied it by the growing light. His shelter was compromised. The nearest town, São Gabriel de Cachoeira, was over 200 kilometers to the east, through some of the most hostile terrain on the planet. Even if he could make it, walking into a town carrying illegal weapons and classified documents would be insane. He would be arrested or killed before he could explain. His finger traced the network of rivers that spider-webbed across the map. Rivers were the highways of the Amazon, the only reliable means of long-distance travel, but they were also choke points, easy to monitor and control. If the hunters knew what they were doing, they would have boats stationed at every major confluence. Then his finger stopped on a mark he had made months ago and almost forgotten. An old Funai outpost, Fundação Nacional do Índio, Brazil's indigenous protection agency. It had been abandoned in the 1990s, but the structure was supposedly still standing. More importantly, according to the trader who had ferried him upriver, there was an old radio transmitter there, left behind when the government pulled out. If he could get it working, he could call for help. Real help. Not the compromised channels of the US military, but a journalist, an NGO, someone outside the system. The outpost was 60 kilometers northwest, 2 to 3 days of hard travel through terrain that ranged from difficult to lethal. But it was a concrete objective, a mission, and missions he could handle. Missions gave structure to chaos. He looked at Max, who was watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. The dog was exhausted, his flanks heaving, his injured leg showing a more pronounced limp, but there was no quit in him. Never had been. "We're going to make a run for it, boy," Marcus said quietly, folding the map. "Old Funai Station, northwest. 3 days. You up for it?" Max's tail thumped once against the ground. It was answer enough. Marcus checked his supplies. He had 4 MREs left, enough for maybe 2 days if he stretched them. His water filtration system was intact but slow, and finding clean water sources would cost time they didn't have. His ammunition situation was better. 3 full magazines for the rifle, 2 for his pistol. Enough for a firefight, but not a sustained engagement. The hard case with the evidence was the biggest problem. It was bulky, heavy, and impossible to conceal. But leaving it behind wasn't an option. It was the reason Harris had died. It was the reason Marcus was being hunted. It was the truth, and the truth had weight. He redistributed his pack, abandoning anything non-essential. The hammock stayed. The extra clothes, gone. The small camp stove, gone. He kept the medical kit, the water filter, the map, the compass, and the evidence. Everything else was excess weight that could get them killed. As the sun finally broke the horizon, painting the jungle canopy in shades of gold and emerald, Marcus and Max set out. They moved fast, sacrificing stealth for speed. The equation had changed. The hunters knew where they had been. Now it was a race to see who could reach the finish line first. The first day was a blur of pain and endurance. They covered over 25 kilometers, a brutal pace through terrain that seemed designed by a malevolent god to break human will. They waded through swamps where the water rose to Marcus's chest and venomous snakes hung from low branches. They hacked through walls of thorny vegetation that tore clothes and skin with equal indifference. They crossed rivers swollen by recent rains, the current so strong that Marcus had to tie a rope to Max and drag them both across, clinging to submerged logs. Twice they heard the distant sound of a helicopter. Each time, Marcus pulled them into the thickest available cover and froze, praying that the canopy was dense enough to hide their thermal signatures. Each time the helicopter passed, its search pattern methodical and expanding. They were still looking. They would never stop looking. By late afternoon, both man and dog were on the verge of collapse. Marcus's boots had rubbed his feet raw, and every step sent jolts of pain up his legs. Max's limp had worsened significantly, his right hind leg barely touching the ground. But they couldn't stop. Not yet. They needed to put more distance between themselves and the hunters. As twilight approached, Marcus found a small rise, a rare piece of high ground that gave them a tactical advantage and a view of their back trail. He set up a minimal camp, no fire, just a space to collapse and recover. He cleaned Max's injured leg, applying antibiotic ointment from his medical kit, and fed the dog his entire ration of food. Max needed the calories more than he did. Marcus sat with his back against a tree, his rifle across his lap, and allowed himself 5 minutes of rest. Just 5 minutes to close his eyes and let the adrenaline drain away. But sleep didn't come. His mind was too active, too wired, running through scenarios and contingencies. He pulled out the hard case and stared at it. Inside was evidence that could bring down careers, maybe even a presidential administration. It was also the reason good men had died and why he and Max were being hunted like animals. He thought about destroying it, about burying it deep and walking away. He could disappear. New identity, new life. It wouldn't be the first time someone had gone off-grid permanently. But then he thought about Lieutenant Harris, strapped into that pilot's seat, abandoned and forgotten. He thought about the young men he had led in Iraq and Afghanistan, men who had believed they were fighting for something noble, something true. They deserved better than a government that trafficked in secrets and lies. Max's head suddenly snapped up, his body tensing. Marcus was on his feet instantly, rifle up, scanning the tree line. And then he saw them. Lights. Multiple lights, moving in formation, less than a kilometer behind them, and closing fast. The hunters had dogs of their own now, tracking dogs that had picked up their scent. The net was closing. Marcus made a decision that went against every instinct he had. Instead of running, he moved laterally, perpendicular to their pursuit vector. He found a small clearing with good visibility and defensible approaches. If he was going to be caught, he would choose the ground. He would make them pay for every meter. He positioned Max behind a fallen log, a natural rampart that provided cover and concealment. The dog seemed to understand what was happening. This wasn't a retreat anymore. This was a last stand. Marcus checked his rifle one final time, chambered a round, and flipped down his night vision. He had 3 magazines. Maybe 90 seconds of sustained fire. He would make each shot count. The lights grew closer. He could hear voices now, speaking in English. American voices. His own countrymen, sent to kill him. The irony was not lost on him. The first man entered the clearing, sweeping with his rifle. His movements textbook, perfect. Marcus let him pass. The second man followed, then a third. When the fourth man stepped into view, Marcus made his move. He fired a single shot. The suppressor reduced the rifle's bark to a sharp cough. The fourth man dropped, clutching his leg, screaming. The others scattered, returning fire wildly, their muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. Marcus fired again, aiming for the flashes, and was rewarded with another cry of pain. "Man down! Man down! Contact front!" Max erupted from behind the log, a grey fury that materialized out of the darkness. He hit the nearest man with the full force of his 90-pound body, jaws closing on the man's weapon arm. The man screamed, dropping his rifle, trying desperately to shake off the snarling nightmare that was tearing into him. Marcus used the confusion to move, rolling to a new position, firing as he went. Another man went down, but there were more of them, and they were recovering from the initial shock, laying down suppressing fire that chewed through the vegetation around him. He heard a yelp of pain. Max, the dog, had been hit. A white-hot rage descended over Marcus, the kind of cold, murderous fury that had made him effective in combat and terrifying to his enemies. He rose from cover and advanced, firing with mechanical precision. 1 shot, 1 target, 1 kill. He moved through them like a reaper, and they broke, falling back into the jungle, dragging their wounded with them. Silence descended, broken only by the ringing in Marcus's ears and his own ragged breathing. He rushed to Max. The dog was lying on his side, blood matting his fur. A bullet had grazed his shoulder, a deep furrow but not life-threatening. Max looked up at him, his eyes clouded with pain but still alert, still trusting. "I got you, boy. I got you." Marcus worked fast, applying pressure to stop the bleeding, then wrapping the wound with gauze. Max whimpered but didn't struggle, understanding that his handler was helping, not hurting. They couldn't stay here. The hunters would regroup and return with overwhelming force. Marcus helped Max to his feet, supporting the dog's weight, and they disappeared into the night once more. Behind them, the jungle swallowed their trail. But ahead, somewhere in that vast green darkness, was salvation or death. Marcus didn't know which. He only knew they would face it together. Dawn broke over the Amazon with the indifference of a god who had witnessed 10,000 years of death and rebirth. The light came slowly, grudgingly, filtering through layers of canopy until it reached the jungle floor as a diluted greenish glow. Marcus and Max had been moving for 6 hours without rest, a forced march driven by desperation and the knowledge that staying still meant death. Max was flagging badly now. The bullet wound had stopped bleeding, but the dog was running on fumes, his movements stiff and labored. Marcus had fashioned a crude harness from paracord, taking some of the weight off Max's injured shoulder, but it was a temporary measure. The dog needed real medical attention, antibiotics, rest, none of which Marcus could provide. They had covered another 20 kilometers through the night, navigating by compass and pure determination. The hunters had fallen back after the firefight, regrouping or perhaps calling for reinforcements. Marcus knew he had bought them time, but not much. Maybe 12 hours, maybe less. By mid-morning, they reached a broad, slow-moving river. The water was the color of coffee with cream, stained by tannins from rotting vegetation. According to his map, this was the Rio Curicuriari, a tributary that would lead them northwest toward the abandoned Funai outpost. Following the river would be faster than hacking through the jungle, but it would also make them visible from the air. It was a calculated risk Marcus had no choice but to take. He found a fallen kapok tree that had toppled into the river, its massive trunk extending 20 meters into the water. The wood was waterlogged but still buoyant, a natural raft. Marcus tied his pack and the hard case to the trunk with cord, then helped Max onto the makeshift vessel. The dog lay down with a groan of relief, his amber eyes half closed with exhaustion. Marcus waded into the river, keeping one hand on the log, using the current to carry them downstream. The water was warm, almost body temperature, and within it moved things that he preferred not to think about. Caimans, piranhas, anacondas. The Amazon was a food chain with no bottom, where everything ate everything else in an endless cycle of consumption. They drifted for hours, moving with the lazy current, Marcus's legs pumping steadily to steer them around obstacles. The jungle on either bank was a solid wall of green, impenetrable and hostile. Birds called from the canopy, their voices alien and unsettling. Once, a troop of spider monkeys paced them from the trees, hooting and throwing branches, defending their territory from the strange creatures below. Around noon, Marcus heard it, the distant thrum of rotor blades. He looked up, his heart sinking. Through a gap in the canopy, he could see it. A civilian helicopter, the same model he had seen at the crash site, flying a search pattern along the river. It was still a kilometer away, but closing fast. There was no time to reach the bank, no time to hide. Marcus made a decision born of desperation. He took a deep breath, grabbed Max by the harness, and pulled them both under the log, into the murky water beneath. The water closed over his head, warm and suffocating. He held Max tight, feeling the dog's body tense with panic. Dogs hated being submerged. It went against every instinct they had. But Max trusted him, had always trusted him, and he held still, his lungs burning, his heart hammering against Marcus's chest. Above them, through the distorted lens of water, Marcus could see the shadow of the helicopter pass overhead. It hovered directly above their position, the rotor wash creating ripples on the surface. Seconds stretched into eternities. Marcus's lungs screamed for air. Max was struggling now, his powerful legs kicking, trying to surface. Then, blessedly, the helicopter moved on, continuing its pattern downriver. Marcus waited another 30 seconds, counted them off in his head, then surfaced. He gasped for air, pulling Max up with him. The dog coughed and sputtered, shaking water from his fur, but he was alive. They were both alive. Marcus clung to the log, his entire body shaking with the aftershock of adrenaline. That had been too close, far too close. He looked at Max, whose eyes were wide and dilated with stress, and made a silent promise. He would get them out of this. He would get Max to safety, whatever it cost, whatever it took. They continued downriver, more cautious now, listening for the return of the helicopter. It came twice more over the next 3 hours, each time forcing them to submerge, each time pushing them closer to the edge of their endurance. By the time Marcus finally spotted the landmark he had been searching for, a distinctive rocky outcropping shaped like a broken tooth, both he and Max were hypothermic, despite the warm water, their bodies shutting down from exhaustion and stress. The Funai outpost was a kilometer inland from the river, hidden in a small valley. Marcus dragged himself and Max onto the muddy bank, his legs barely able to support his weight. They lay there for long minutes, simply breathing, their minds too numb for thought. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Marcus forced himself to move. He helped Max to his feet, and together they stumbled into the jungle, following a faint trail that had once been a supply route, but was now almost completely reclaimed by vegetation. The outpost appeared out of the green like a ghost. It had been a small complex once, maybe half a dozen buildings constructed from cinder block and corrugated metal. Now it was a ruin, the buildings slowly collapsing under the weight of vines and the relentless pressure of root systems that pushed up through concrete floors. The metal roofs had rusted through in places, creating skylights for the trees that were growing inside the structures. But it was shelter. And somewhere in this decaying maze was a radio transmitter that might, just might, still work. Marcus chose the largest building, what had once been the administrative center, and cleared a space inside. The floor was thick with bat guano and the remains of animal nests, but it was dry and defensible. He set Max down gently, rewrapped the dog's wound with the last of his clean gauze, and gave him the final MRE, chicken and noodles. Max ate without enthusiasm, his movements slow and pained. Marcus's own stomach was a tight knot of hunger, but he ignored it. He had gone days without food before, in SEER training and on operations. The body could function on surprisingly little. The mind was what failed first, and his mind needed to stay sharp. He began his search of the compound, moving from building to building in the fading light. The second structure had been living quarters, now stripped bare, except for rotting bed frames. The third was a supply shed, its contents long since looted or decomposed. It was in the fourth building, a small concrete bunker half buried in the hillside, that he found it. The radio room. The equipment was ancient, 1980s-era technology that looked positively Stone Age compared to modern systems. But it was military-grade, built to last, and most importantly, it was still connected to a solar panel array on the roof. The panels were covered in grime and vegetation, but when Marcus brushed them clean, a small LED on the radio's power supply flickered to life. Green. Power. His hands trembled as he sat down at the console. This was it. His one chance to get the evidence out, to make Harris's death mean something. He flipped switches, bringing the system online. The transmitter hummed, warming up, its vacuum tubes glowing a soft orange in the dimness. But first, he needed to understand what he was dealing with. He pulled the hard drive from the case and examined it more closely in the better light of the radio room. That's when he saw it. So small, he had almost missed it. A tiny LED embedded in the casing, glowing a faint red. Active. Transmitting. The blood drained from Marcus's face. The hard drive wasn't just evidence. It was a beacon. From the moment he had taken it from the crash site, it had been broadcasting his position. That's how they had found him so fast. That's how they kept finding him. The helicopter, the ground teams, all of it had been guided by the very evidence he was trying to protect. He had been carrying his own death warrant. For a moment, Marcus simply sat there, the weight of the betrayal crushing him. Harris had been so careful, so thorough, but even he hadn't anticipated this level of paranoia, this depth of fail-safes. Whoever had designed this operation had assumed that anyone who found the crash site would take the bait, would grab the evidence without checking for tracking devices. And Marcus had walked right into the trap. He looked at the hard drive, glowing malevolently in his hand. He could smash it, destroy it, and disappear back into the jungle. But then, Harris's death would be meaningless. The conspiracy would remain buried. The men who had ordered murders and run illegal operations would never face justice. Unless... An idea formed in Marcus's exhausted mind. Dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was the only play he had left. He couldn't run from the beacon, so he would use it. He would turn their trap into his ambush. He carefully placed the hard drive back in its case, making sure the LED was clearly visible and transmitting. Then he positioned the case in the center of the compound's main clearing, propped up against a rotting supply crate where it would be easily visible from the air. The beacon would draw them here like moths to a flame, and Marcus would be waiting. He spent the next 3 hours preparing the battlefield. It was work he knew intimately, had taught to countless young SEALs during his years as an instructor, turning terrain into an ally, creating kill zones, establishing fields of fire. The compound was small, maybe 50 meters across, surrounded by jungle on all sides. There were 3 main approaches, and Marcus mined them all. Not with explosives, he had none, but with improvised traps built from materials scavenged from the ruins, tripwires connected to collapsing structures, sharpened stakes hidden in tall grass, a deadfall trap constructed from a suspended metal roof panel that would crush anyone who triggered it. They were crude, possibly ineffective, but they would create chaos. And in chaos, the advantage went to the defender who knew the ground. His final preparation was the most important. He jury-rigged the old radio transmitter to the hard drive, using scavenged cables and connectors. He didn't have the encryption keys to read the drive's contents, but he didn't need them. He only needed to copy the raw data and broadcast it. Somewhere, someone would be listening. A signals intelligence station, a rival intelligence agency, an amateur radio operator. It didn't matter who. Once the data was in the wild, it couldn't be buried again. The transmission would take time, at least 2 hours to upload the full contents of the drive on the old equipment. 2 hours he would have to buy with blood and bullets. 2 hours Max would have to survive. As night fell, Marcus positioned Max in the bunker radio room. It was the safest location, concrete walls and only one entrance. He gave the dog water, checking his wound again. It looked clean, no signs of infection, but Max was in bad shape. His breathing was shallow, his eyes glassy with fever. He needed veterinary care soon, or he wouldn't make it. "You stay here, boy," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't suppress. "You guard this room. Don't let anyone in who isn't me. Understand?" Max looked at him with those intelligent amber eyes, and Marcus saw understanding there, and something else. Fear. Not for himself, but for Marcus. The dog knew what was coming. Marcus gripped Max's head in both hands, pressing his forehead against the dog's scarred snout. "I'll come back, I promise. We're getting out of this. Both of us." He didn't know if he believed it, but Max needed to hear it. So did he. Marcus left the bunker, sealing the door behind him. He took his position in the ruins of the administrative building, on the second floor, where a collapsed wall provided cover and a clear view of the compound. He had moved the hard case closer to the center of the clearing, the beacon pulsing like a heartbeat. Come and get it, he thought. Come and die. He didn't have to wait long. By 2100 hours, he heard them. The helicopter first, circling, identifying the beacon's location. Then the sound of boots in the jungle, moving with tactical precision, surrounding the compound. They were taking their time, assuming their prey was exhausted, assuming he would be easy to capture or kill. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Marcus counted them as they entered the clearing. 8 men, all in tactical gear, night vision, and suppressed weapons. Professional. Military contractors probably, hired guns with no loyalty except to the paycheck. The kind of men who would murder and ask questions never. The first man triggered the tripwire. A rusted metal beam, precariously balanced, came crashing down with a sound like thunder. The man screamed as 200 pounds of steel crushed his legs. The others scattered, shouting, their neat formation dissolving into chaos. Marcus opened fire. The first shot took the team leader in the chest. The second and third dropped 2 more operators who were caught in the open. The remaining 4 dove for cover, returning fire, their suppressed weapons coughing in the darkness. Rounds chewed through the concrete around Marcus, but he had already moved, rolling to a new position, firing as he went. Another man went down. Then, another. But they were adapting, locating his muzzle flash, concentrating their fire. Marcus felt something punch into his left side, a hammer blow that spun him around. Body armor. The plate had caught it. But the impact left him gasping, ribs screaming in protest. He fell back, moving through the ruins he had memorized, using doorways and walls as cover. One of the remaining operators rushed his position, trying to flank him. He ran straight into the deadfall trap. The metal panel fell with crushing force, and the man's scream was cut short with sickening finality. 2 left. Marcus could hear them communicating, regrouping. They knew they were losing. They were going to call for extraction, for backup. He couldn't let that happen. He pulled a road flare from his vest, a last-minute addition to his kit. He lit it, and threw it into the center of the compound. The brilliant red light stabbed through the darkness, illuminating everything in harsh, bloody tones. The two remaining operators were caught in the open, their night vision useless in the sudden glare, blinded. Marcus fired twice. Both men dropped. Silence fell over the compound, broken only by the crackling of the flare and Marcus's labored breathing. His side was on fire where the bullet had hit, and he could feel wetness spreading under his vest. The plate had stopped penetration, but the blunt force trauma had broken something inside. Ribs, maybe worse. He stumbled to the bunker, barely able to walk. Inside, the radio was still humming, the upload progress bar showing 87%. So close. He collapsed against the wall next to Max, who whined softly and licked his hand. The dog's tongue was hot and dry, fever burning. Almost done, boy. Almost home. The helicopter was returning. He could hear it in the distance, growing louder. They would see the carnage, see their team dead. They would come with everything they had. And Marcus had nothing left. No ammunition, no strength. Just a promise to a dying dog and a transmission that was 94% complete. He pulled Max close, the dog's warm body pressed against his, and closed his eyes. If this was the end, at least they were together. At least Harris's truth would survive, would be out there in the ether, impossible to silence. The upload bar reached 100%. The radio emitted a single triumphant beep. Transmission complete. Marcus allowed himself a smile. They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had won. The helicopter landed in the clearing, its rotors whipping up dust and debris. Footsteps approached the bunker. Marcus raised his pistol, the barrel shaking in his trembling hand. If they wanted him, they would have to come through that door, and he would take as many of them with him as he could. The door burst open. Flashlights blinded him. Voices shouted commands. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "Stand down! Captain Reed, stand down! U.S. Diplomatic Security!" Marcus blinked, his vision clearing. The men in the doorway weren't wearing tactical gear. They wore suits, or what was left of them after trekking through the jungle. And the man in front, holding up a badge, was someone Marcus recognized from news broadcasts. Benjamin Carter, the journalist. "Captain Reed, we received your transmission. All of it. You're safe now. Both of you are safe." Marcus's pistol clattered to the floor. His hand found Max's head, fingers tangling in matted fur. "Get him help. Dog first. He saved my life. Already called in. Medevac is 2 minutes out." Marcus nodded, and then the darkness finally claimed him. Consciousness returned in fragments, disjointed and confusing. The first thing Marcus registered was the absence of sound. No howler monkeys, no insects, no endless suffocating drone of the jungle. Just the soft beep of medical equipment and the whisper of air conditioning. The second thing was the smell. Antiseptic, clean, sterile, hospital. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the harsh fluorescent lighting. White ceiling tiles. Foy stand beside the bed, heart monitor displaying a steady rhythm. He tried to move and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through his left side, sharp enough to take his breath away. Broken ribs. His mind supplied automatically. At least 3, maybe more. "Easy there, Captain. You're not going anywhere for a while." Marcus turned his head, the movement sending fresh waves of pain radiating through his skull. A woman sat in a chair beside his bed, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, wearing business-casual clothes that marked her as government, not military, civilian authority. Her eyes were sharp and assessing, but not unkind. "Where am I?" His voice came out as a croak, his throat raw and dry. "U.S. Embassy, Brasilia. Medical wing. You've been unconscious for 2 days." She leaned forward, offering him a cup of water with a straw. He drank gratefully, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm with the State Department, though for the purposes of this conversation, let's just say I work for people who are very interested in what you found." Marcus's mind was clearing, shaking off the fog of painkillers and exhaustion. 2 days. He had lost 2 days. "Max. Where's Max?" Chen's expression softened slightly. "Your dog is alive. He's in veterinary care. Same facility. Bullet wound cleaned and sutured. Antibiotics administered. Fluids. The works. The vet says he's a tough bastard. Should make a full recovery. The relief that washed over Marcus was so intense, it left him dizzy. Max was alive. That was all that mattered. Everything else was secondary. I want to see him. You will. Soon as the doctors clear you to move. Which won't be today. Possibly not tomorrow. Chen pulled out a tablet, swiping through screens. Right now, you and I need to have a very serious conversation about what happened in that jungle. And more importantly, what was on that hard drive. Marcus studied her carefully, his operator's instincts assessing threat levels even through the haze of medication. Who are you really? CIA? DIA? Does it matter? Chen met his gaze evenly. What matters is that the transmission you sent from that Funai station was received by 17 different intelligence agencies, 3 major news organizations, and approximately 400 amateur radio operators across 2 continents. You didn't just ring a bell, Captain. You set off a nuclear alarm. The contents of that hard drive are currently being analyzed by more cryptographers than worked on the Enigma code. Marcus closed his eyes, processing. 17 agencies. That meant it was real, verifiable, impossible to suppress. Operation Nightfall. Among other things, the hard drive contained evidence of illegal arms transfers, black budget operations, and at least 4 assassinations of U.S. military personnel who got too close to the truth. Lieutenant Daniel Harris was just one name on a very long list. Chen's voice hardened. The people responsible thought they had buried it 20 years ago. They thought the jungle would keep their secrets. You proved them wrong. How many are implicated? Counting the deceased? Over 50 individuals. Current serving officers, retired generals, 3 sitting congressmen, and a former deputy director of the CIA. The president has already ordered a special investigation. Heads are going to roll, Captain, because of you. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction settle over him. Harris hadn't died for nothing. The men who had murdered him, who had armed militias and destabilized entire regions for profit and power, would finally face justice. It wouldn't bring Harris back. It wouldn't erase the nightmares or heal the scars, but it was something. It was enough. What happens to me now? Chen hesitated, choosing her words carefully. That's complicated. Technically, you're guilty of several federal crimes. Illegal possession of classified materials, unauthorized access to government property, resisting apprehension by federal contractors. Though given that those contractors were trying to kill you, that one's murky. You also entered Brazil on a tourist visa and proceeded to live here illegally for 8 months while armed with unregistered weapons. Marcus's jaw tightened. So I'm going to prison. No, Chen said the word with finality. You're not. Because there are people in very high places who understand that you're a hero who exposed a criminal conspiracy, not a criminal who stole classified information. The distinction matters. A lot. She swiped to a new screen on her tablet. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to accept an honorable discharge with full benefits, backdated to the day you entered Brazil. Your service record will be amended to reflect a classified counterintelligence operation that has now been declassified. You'll receive a commendation for actions above and beyond. And in return, you're going to sign approximately 37 different non-disclosure agreements and never, ever speak publicly about the details of what you found. Marcus absorbed this. It was a deal. A good one, all things considered. But deals always had catches. And if I refuse, then the people whose careers you just destroyed will make sure you spend the next 20 years in a federal prison fighting legal battles you can't win. They may be going down, but they still have enough power left to make your life hell on the way. Chen leaned back in her chair. I'm not threatening you, Captain. I'm explaining reality. Take the deal. Go home. Live your life. You've earned it. Home. The word felt foreign, abstract. Marcus hadn't had a home in years. The shelter in the jungle had been a hiding place, not a home. Before that, a series of bases and deployment zones. Before that, a childhood he barely remembered in a small town in Montana that he hadn't visited in 15 years. Where was home for a man who had spent his adult life at war? What about Max? The dog comes with you. Officially, he's being retired from military service with full honors. Unofficially, he's yours. You saved each other's lives out there. The least we can do is let you stay together." Chen stood, tucking the tablet under her arm. "Think about it, Captain. But don't think too long. This deal has an expiration date. Once the media circus really gets going, the politicians are going to want scapegoats. Better to be the hero who disappeared than the whistleblower who stuck around." She left, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Marcus lay there, staring at the ceiling, his mind churning. He had accomplished his mission. The truth was out. Harris was avenged. But what came next? What did life look like for a soldier who had lost his war? 4 days later, Marcus was finally cleared to move. A nurse pushed him in a wheelchair down a series of corridors, through security checkpoints and locked doors, until they reached a section of the embassy that smelled distinctly of animals and antiseptic, the veterinary clinic. Max was in the third kennel, lying on a thick pad, his bandaged shoulder visible beneath the edge of a recovery cone. The dog's head lifted as Marcus approached, his amber eyes locking onto his handler with an intensity that transcended mere recognition. It was reunion. It was relief. It was love in its purest, most unconditional form. "Can I go in?" Marcus asked the nurse. "Doctor said 10 minutes. Don't get him too excited." Marcus opened the kennel door and lowered himself carefully to the floor, his ribs screaming in protest. Max struggled to his feet, the cone around his neck making the movement awkward, and pressed his body against Marcus's chest. The dog was trembling, his entire frame shaking with emotion. Marcus wrapped his arms around him, burying his face in the thick fur, and for the first time since Fallujah, since he had watched his team die, he wept. He wept for Harris, strapped into that cockpit for 20 years, forgotten. He wept for his lost team, for the young SEALs who had followed him into hell and never came back. He wept for himself, for the man he had been before the war broke him. And he wept with relief, with gratitude, that this one thing, this one loyal soul, had survived. Max whined softly, licking the tears from Marcus's face, his tail thumping weakly against the kennel wall. They stayed like that for a long time. 2 scarred warriors drawing strength from each other, bound by trauma and survival, and a bond that death itself had failed to break. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood at the arrival gate of Denver International Airport, Max at his side in a service dog vest. The dog was still favoring his injured leg slightly, but the veterinarian had declared him fit for travel. Marcus himself was held together by pain medication and sheer determination, but he was mobile, and that was enough. He had signed Chen's documents, all 37 of them. His discharge papers were in his backpack, along with a new passport, a cashier's check for his back pay and benefits, and a single business card with a phone number and the words, "If you need anything." SC. The deal was done. Marcus Reed, Captain, U.S. Navy SEALs, retired, was officially a civilian. The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. He had no plan, no destination beyond getting out of D.C. and away from the circus that Operation Nightfall had become. The story had broken wide open, dominating news cycles for weeks. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Grand juries were being convened. The former deputy director of the CIA had been arrested trying to flee the country. It was chaos, and Marcus wanted no part of it. He had done his duty. Now, he just wanted peace. A voice called his name. Marcus turned, his hand instinctively moving to where his sidearm would have been before he remembered he was disarmed, civilian, no longer a threat. An older man approached, maybe 65, wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and a weathered cowboy hat. His face was deeply lined, tanned by years of sun and wind, but his eyes were kind. "Captain Reed, I'm Tom Harris, Daniel's father." Marcus felt his breath catch. Harris, the pilot. He had never thought about the man having family, having people who loved him and mourned his loss. "Sir, Tom held up a hand, stopping him. "I read the reports. What you did, what you risked to bring my son's story to light, to bring him home." His voice cracked slightly. "They found his remains. The Navy is giving him a proper burial at Arlington, with honors, After 20 years, my boy is finally coming home. Because of you. Marcus didn't know what to say. Words felt inadequate, hollow. I'm sorry for your loss, sir. Your son was a hero. What happened to him was wrong. Yes, it was, but you made it right. As right as it can be. Tom looked down at Max, who was watching the exchange with alert interest. This the dog who was with you? Yes, sir. Max. Tom knelt slowly, his joints creaking with age, and extended his hand. Max sniffed it carefully, then allowed the old man to scratch behind his ears. My son loved dogs. Had a retriever growing up, name of Duke. Went everywhere together, just like you two. He looked up at Marcus. I came here to thank you, Captain. And to ask you something. Anything, sir? Tom stood, reaching into his jacket and pulling out an envelope. This is a deed to a property in Montana, about 40 miles outside of Missoula. 20 acres, small cabin, borders national forest. It was Daniel's. He bought it right before his last deployment, said he was going to retire there, live quiet. He never got the chance. Tom pressed the envelope into Marcus's hands. I want you to have it. You and your dog. Daniel would have wanted it to go to someone who understands, someone who fought the same fight. Marcus stared at the envelope, his mind reeling. A home. Actual, physical permanence. A place that wasn't just running from the past, but building something new. Sir, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not enough, Tom said firmly. You gave me closure, Captain. You gave my family peace. This is the least I can do. Take it. Make use of it. Live the life my son never got to live. Marcus's hand trembled as he accepted the envelope. He met Tom Harris's eyes and saw reflected there the same grief, the same survivor's guilt that haunted his own mirror. They were both men, shaped by loss, trying to find meaning in a world that often offered none. Thank you, sir. I'll honor his memory. I promise. Tom nodded, satisfied. He scratched Max's ears one more time, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of travelers. Marcus stood there, the envelope clutched in his hand, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Fragile. Tentative. But real. He looked down at Max. What do you think, boy? Montana? Could be good. Mountains, forests, clean air. No jungles. No wars. Max's tail wagged once, then twice. It was answer enough. 6 months later. The cabin was small but solid, built from local timber and riverstone by someone who knew their craft. It sat on a gentle rise, overlooking a valley where elk grazed in the mornings and the Clark Fork River glittered silver in the afternoon sun. The nearest town was 40 miles away, just close enough for supply runs, but far enough to provide the isolation Marcus craved. He had spent the last 6 months rebuilding it. New roof, new windows, a wood stove that actually heated the place efficiently. The work was hard, physical, and utterly consuming. It left no room for nightmares. By the time he collapsed into bed each night, his body was too exhausted for the dreams to come. Max had healed well. His shoulder was fully recovered, though he still limped slightly on cold mornings, an old injury acting up. But he was strong, vital, and seemed to relish the wide-open spaces after the claustrophobic density of the Amazon. He spent his days patrolling the property line, chasing squirrels with the enthusiasm of a dog half his age, and sleeping in front of the fire at night. They fell into a routine. Marcus would wake before dawn, brew coffee, and sit on the porch watching the sun rise over the Bitterroot Mountains. Max would join him, leaning against his leg, and together they would watch the world wake up in silence. No words needed, just companionship, just peace. On this particular morning, as autumn painted the aspens gold and bronze, Marcus heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A vehicle was coming up the long dirt road to the cabin. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle leaning against the porch post. Old habits died hard, but he relaxed when he recognized the truck. Forest Service, from the logo on the door. A woman climbed out, mid-30s, dark hair in a braid, wearing the distinctive green uniform of a ranger. She approached the porch with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in the wilderness. Max watched her but didn't growl, his assessment apparently finding her non-threatening. "Morning," she called out. "You must be the new owner. I'm Ranger Jessica Torres. I manage this district. Marcus nodded, setting down his coffee cup. Marcus Reed. Something wrong? Not at all. Just making the rounds, introducing myself to the folks on the edge of the forest. You planning to hunt this season? Probably. Haven't decided yet. Torres studied him for a moment, her gaze taking in the military bearing he couldn't quite hide, the scars visible on his forearms, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. Recognition flickered across her face. You're him, the guy from the news. Operation Nightfall. Marcus tensed. This was what he had been dreading. The reason he had chosen such an isolated location. Being recognized. Being pulled back into that world. I don't talk about that. I'm not asking you to, Torres said quickly. I'm just saying, welcome. We get a lot of vets out here. People looking for quiet, for space to heal. You're in good company. Nobody's going to bother you. She paused. But if you ever want to talk or need anything, I'm around. And I mean that. Marcus felt some of the tension drain from his shoulders. Appreciate it. Torres smiled and turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. There's a guy in town, runs a non-profit for veterans. Therapy dogs, outdoor programs, that kind of thing. His name's Mike Chen. He's always looking for volunteers. You and your dog there, you'd be perfect for it. Just something to think about. She climbed back into her truck and drove away, leaving Marcus standing on his porch, her words echoing in his mind. Volunteers. Helping other veterans. It wasn't a mission, not in the military sense, but it was purpose. And purpose was something he realized he needed, something that had been missing since he had signed those discharge papers. He looked down at Max, who was watching him with those knowing amber eyes. What do you think, boy? Got any more saving people left in you? Max's tail wagged. Once, twice. Then he stood and moved to the edge of the porch, staring out at the mountains, assuming his sentinel position. Always watching, always ready. That was his nature, what he was bred for, trained for. You could take the dog out of the war, but you couldn't take the warrior out of the dog. Marcus realized the same was true of himself. He wasn't built for complete isolation. He had spent his entire adult life as part of a team, serving something larger than himself. That need didn't disappear just because the uniform did. Maybe there was a way to serve that didn't involve combat. Maybe there was a way to use his experience to help others find the peace he was still searching for. He pulled out his phone, a concession to modern life he had made reluctantly, and looked up the non-profit Torres had mentioned, Warriors Rising Foundation. The website showed pictures of veterans hiking with service dogs, fishing in mountain streams, sitting around campfires, healing, moving forward, living. He found the contact information for Mike Chen and stared at it for a long moment. This was the hard part. Reaching out, connecting, allowing himself to be part of something again after isolating for so long. But he thought about Lieutenant Harris, about the old man who had given him this second chance, and he knew what he had to do. He made the call. 1 year later, the group of veterans gathered in the clearing, 8 men and women ranging in age from mid-20s to late 50s. Some bore visible scars, others carried invisible ones. All of them were there for the same reason, to find a way forward. Marcus stood at the front of the group, Max sitting calmly at his side. The dog wore his service vest, marking him as a working animal, though his days of military deployment were long behind him. Now he worked a different mission, helping others heal. "My name is Marcus," he began, his voice steady despite the nervousness he felt speaking to a group. "I was a SEAL. I did 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, 1 in Syria. I came home with PTSD, survivor's guilt, and no idea how to function in civilian life. I isolated. I ran. I ended up in the Amazon jungle trying to hide from everything." He paused, looking at the faces watching him. He saw recognition there. They understood. "I'm not going to tell you it gets easy. It doesn't. The nightmares don't just stop. The guilt doesn't magically disappear. But it gets manageable. You learn to live with it. You find purpose. You move forward." He gestured to Max. "This is Max. He was my MWD downrange. We saved each other's lives more times than I can count. He's the reason I'm standing here today. He taught me that you don't heal alone. You need someone who understands, who doesn't judge, who just Stays. One of the veterans, a young woman with a prosthetic leg, raised her hand. How do you deal with the hypervigilance? I can't go to the grocery store without scoping out exits and threat assessments. Marcus nodded. That was a question he knew well. You don't fight it. You redirect it. That training that makes you scan rooms? Use it. Become a security consultant. Teach self-defense. Turn what feels like a curse into a skill that helps people. The goal isn't to become who you were before deployment. That person doesn't exist anymore. The goal is to become someone new. Someone who integrates what you learned instead of trying to bury it. They talked for 2 hours, sharing stories, strategies, and small victories. Marcus found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected, talking about the jungle, about Harris, about the long road from that hospital in Brasilia to this clearing in Montana. It was cathartic, painful, and necessary. After the session ended, Mike Chen approached him, a broad smile on his weathered face. Marcus, that was incredible. You're a natural at this. Have you thought about doing it more formally? Training to be a peer counselor? Marcus considered it. 6 months ago, he would have refused immediately. The idea of being responsible for others' healing when he was still figuring out his own seemed impossible. But something had shifted. The cabin wasn't a hiding place anymore. Montana wasn't exile. It was home. And home was where you built something, where you contributed. Yeah, he said finally. I think I'd like that. 2 years later, the fall morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that made Montana famous. Marcus stood in the cemetery outside of town, his hand resting on a simple granite headstone. The inscription read, L.T. Daniel Harris, U.S. Navy, 1979-2003. His sacrifice will not be forgotten. Tom Harris had been buried here 6 months ago, peaceful in his sleep, finally at rest, knowing his son's story had been told. Marcus visited regularly, keeping the gravesite clean, leaving flowers when the season allowed. It was a debt he could never fully repay, but he tried. Max sat beside him, grayer now around the muzzle, moving a bit slower. The dog was nearly 8 years old, entering the twilight of his working life. But his eyes were still bright, his mind still sharp. He had earned his rest, had more than earned it. But like Marcus, he seemed unwilling to fully retire. They worked together 3 days a week at the Warriors Rising Foundation, Max providing comfort and stability to veterans who needed exactly what the dog had to offer: unconditional acceptance and steadfast loyalty. We did good, didn't we, boy? Marcus said quietly, his breath misting in the cold air. We made it count. Max's tail thumped against the ground. Agreement, confirmation. They had survived. They had exposed the truth. They had found purpose. In the end, that was all anyone could ask for. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Jessica Torres, the forest ranger who had become a close friend, and recently, something more. Dinner tonight. My place. I'm making that chili you like. He smiled and typed back a response. We'll be there. We. Not just him anymore. He was part of a community now, woven into the fabric of this place and these people. He had a job he found meaningful. He had friends who understood his demons because they carried their own. He had a woman who looked at him and saw not a broken soldier, but a man still fighting, still trying, still worthy. He had a home. As he and Max walked back to the truck, the morning sun warm on their faces, Marcus realized something profound. He had spent years running from his past, trying to outrun the guilt and trauma of war. But you couldn't outrun the past. You could only learn to carry it differently. The weight never disappeared, but you got stronger. The burden never lightened, but you found people to help you shoulder it. Lieutenant Harris had died alone in that jungle, his sacrifice unmarked for 2 decades. Marcus had nearly suffered the same fate, but they had both been given something rare, a second chance. Harris's story had been told. His death had meaning, and Marcus was here, alive, building something good from the ashes of tragedy. He opened the truck door, and Max jumped in, settling onto the passenger seat with a contented sigh. Marcus climbed behind the wheel and started the engine. As they drove down the winding mountain road, the valley spreading out below them in autumn glory, he found himself at peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the harder-won peace of acceptance. He had been a warrior. He had been broken. He had been lost, but he had survived. And in surviving, he had found something he never expected to find again. A reason to keep fighting. Not against enemies, but for something better. For healing. For purpose. For hope. The road ahead was long, winding through mountains and valleys, through seasons of cold and warmth. There would be hard days still to come, days when the nightmares returned, when the guilt felt crushing. But there would also be good days, days of laughter and connection, days of small victories and quiet contentment. Marcus glanced at Max, who was watching the passing landscape with alert interest, his grey muzzle resting on the windowsill. They were both survivors, both scarred, both still standing, and together they were stronger than they had ever been apart. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, revealing the world in all its complicated, beautiful, imperfect glory. And in that moment, driving through the mountains with his loyal companion at his side, Marcus Reed finally understood what it meant to come home. Not to a place, but to himself. In the quietest moments and the loudest storms, it is often the unwavering loyalty of a true companion that gives us the strength to carry on. The bond between Marcus and Max is a powerful reminder of this simple, profound truth. If their story of courage and companionship moved you, we invite you to become part of our community. Subscribe to the channel and let us know you're here. Drop a comment below telling us your name, your age, and where you're watching from. Whether you're in New York or New Delhi, Tokyo, or Toronto, we want to know whose heart this story touched today. Your likes, comments, and shares help these stories find a home in others who need them. A new adventure is ready to begin right now, just one click away on your screen. We hope to see you there, friend.